In 1881, at an auction house in The Hague, two collectors stood in front of a small, grimy canvas that nobody else wanted. The paint was so darkened by old varnish that most of the room walked right past it. But these two men stopped. They looked at the painting, then looked at each other, and quietly agreed on something unusual. Neither of them would bid against the other. That day, a man named Arnold de Tombe bought the canvas for 2 guilders and 30 cents, roughly the price of a few loaves of bread. He had no idea he was holding one of the most recognized faces in the history of art. Almost a century and a half later, scientists would scan that same canvas with lasers and X-rays, and what they found would suggest that the painting had been lying to us the whole time. Hold on to that claim. By the end, we're going to take it apart. The picture we now call Girl with a Pearl Earring shows a young woman turning over her shoulder, lips slightly parted, as if she just heard someone call her name. She wears a blue and yellow turban, and hanging from her ear is an enormous glowing pearl that seems to collect every bit of light in the room. Most viewers assume they understand exactly what they're looking at. A portrait, a real jewel, a real woman. Almost none of that turns out to be simple. To understand why this small painting carries so much weight, look first at the man who made it. Around 1665, Johannes Vermeer was 33 years old, living in Delft, inside the house of his wealthy Catholic mother-in-law, Maria Thins. He had been elected head of the local Painters Guild a few years earlier, which tells us he had real standing among his peers. And yet, the math of his household never quite worked. Katharina, his wife, bore 15 children, while Vermeer completed only a handful of paintings a year, by most estimates, around 3. He supplemented his income as an art dealer, a trade inherited from his father along with a tavern called Mechelen. So here is the contradiction worth sitting with for the rest of this video. A painter this slow, this financially stretched, kept reaching for some of the most expensive materials in Europe. Why would a man counting guilders paint with pigment that cost more than gold? The answer starts with what surrounded him. 1665 was not a calm year to be Dutch. In June, the Second Anglo-Dutch War broke out, a brutal fight for control of trade and open water. The painting looks sealed off from all of that, isolated in its dark little frame, but its materials were not sealed off from anything. Its blue began in Afghanistan, its red began in the Americas, and part of its white, as we'll see, came from the very country the Dutch Republic was fighting when Vermeer picked up his brush. Now look at the painting itself, because very little in it is what it first appears to be. Start with the background. For as long as anyone can remember, it has read as a flat, black void. And most people assumed that emptiness was deliberate, a way of isolating the girl outside of time. In 2018, a research team led by Mauritshuis conservator Abby van de Veer ran a full scientific investigation using a scanning method called macro X-ray fluorescence. What they found complicates that assumption. What reads as a black void today was originally a deep green curtain painted over a dark underlayer of soot and charred bone. Over the centuries, the organic pigments in that green glaze, indigo and a yellow dye called weld, broke down and faded, letting the dark layer beneath show through. The blackness we've been reading as intention is, at least partly, decay. Vermeer built a room. Time took the room away and left the underpainting standing in for it. The same chemical decay erased something smaller, her eyelashes. For years, historians believed Vermeer had deliberately left the girl without lashes or brows, part of some idealized, almost abstract treatment of the face. Microscopic analysis found otherwise. The lashes are there, faded to near invisibility, but physically present around both eyes, lost to the same slow erosion that swallowed the curtain. This isn't only true of the earring, it's true of her whole face. Vermeer worked without hard outlines almost anywhere on the canvas. Look at the shadowed side of her nose. There is no line marking where it ends and her cheek begins. The two surfaces simply dissolve into one another, a technique close to what Italian painters called sfumato, smoke-like blending rather than drawn edges. It mimics the soft blur produced by a camera obscura, a device several art historians believe Vermeer used to study light before ever touching a brush to canvas. The effect is unsettling once you notice it. Your eye insists there's a nose there, complete with a bridge and a defined edge, because your brain has built noses out of shadow its entire life. Vermeer never painted that edge. You did. Then there's the turban. A Dutch woman in Delft in the 1660s would not have worn one in daily life. Its presence signals something else. The wealth flowing into the Republic through the Dutch East India Company, which had turned Asian silks and dyes into markers of status across the country. And the blue is not ordinary blue. It's natural ultramarine, ground from lapis lazuli mined in Afghanistan, a pigment that in the 1600s could cost more than gold by weight. A surviving debt connects Vermeer to a Delft apothecary named Dirk de Kock, whose shop also sold painter's materials, though the document itself only proves Vermeer owed money for medicine, not that this is where his ultramarine came from. Still, the choice stands. Remember the contradiction from a few minutes ago? A slow, financially fragile painter reaching for one of the costliest blues on the continent. He spends that expense on fabric. And then, on the object everyone actually remembers, he spends almost nothing at all. Look closely at the earring, closer than any museum label asks you to. Vermeer never painted the outline of a pearl. There is no drawn contour, no defined edge. The entire illusion of a solid, three-dimensional jewel comes from exactly two loaded strokes of lead-white paint. One sharp highlight in the upper left, catching light from an unseen window, and one soft, lower reflection borrowed from the color of her collar. And there is no hook, no wire, no clasp joining it to her earlobe. It simply hangs in space. The title calls it a pearl. The paint itself never does. In 2014, a Dutch professor of theoretical astronomy named Vincent Eyck examined that reflection with a physicist's eyes and published his conclusions in New Scientist. According to Eyck, the shape of the highlight and the proportions of the object don't match how real pearl scatters light. Natural pearl produces a softer, more layered glow because of its internal structure. What we're looking at behaves more like polished tin or lacquered Venetian glass. Historians at the Mauritshuis largely agree, for a simpler reason too. A natural pearl at that scale would have belonged to a royal court, not a middle-class household in Delft. He surrounded the figure with one of the most expensive blues in Europe, then built the single most precious-looking object in the entire painting out of almost nothing. Two strokes of white and the viewer's willingness to complete the shape. That distinction changes the role of the object. This isn't a girl wearing an heirloom. It's a study of exactly how little material it takes to convince a human eye that it's looking at wealth. There's a second illusion running alongside the first one, and it concerns not the jewel, but the woman herself. In the visual hierarchy of Golden Age Holland, this kind of picture was called a tronie, a study of a head, painted to show off a painter's control of light and fabric, not a commissioned likeness meant to record a specific sitter. Officially, then, this is not a portrait built to preserve a person's identity. A real girl likely did sit for it, but her name was never the subject of the painting to begin with, which quietly undercuts the most common misconception about this work, the assumption, cemented by a best-selling novel and a Hollywood film, that we're looking at a particular maid or a particular lover. And yet, the emotional complexity on her face doesn't behave the way a typical tronie usually does. Rembrandt's studio produced tronies too, most leaning toward exaggerated, almost theatrical expression. Shock, laughter, grief pushed to caricature. This face sits in a narrower, more ambiguous middle ground. The historian Edward Snow read her gaze as carrying real, unguarded human feeling. A much earlier critic, writing in 1908, saw in the same two eyes nothing more than calm, unconscious simplicity. Two careful readers, looking at identical brushwork, walking away with opposite conclusions. That gap between what the paint actually shows and what we insist on adding to it is close to the real engine of this whole video. Historians have split into two camps trying to explain that gap, and neither one has managed to fully persuade the other. One camp, associated with the critic Edward Snow, reads the painting as pure optics and human contact, a picture with no hidden moral at all, just Vermeer's fascination with how light behaves on skin, and how directly a painted gaze can meet a real one. The other camp, associated with the writer Ludwig Goldscheider, reads the pearl through a religious lens, a devotional text from the Catholic mystic Francis de Sales, published in the early 1600s and translated into Dutch not long after, describes a woman's ears as needing protection from corrupting words, guarded by pearls that let through only pure speech. Under that reading, the earring isn't a symbol of wealth at all. It's a symbol of chastity, made grotesque by its own exaggerated size. On my own reading, both camps are circling the same target and missing it for the same reason. They're both trying to explain the pearl as if we know for certain that a pearl is what it is. Take that certainty away, and both interpretations start to look less like conclusions and more like elaborate reactions to a rumor the painting itself never confirmed. Recent archival research complicates the picture further, though not in the direction people usually assume. For a long time, the presumed patron behind Vermeer's household was a wealthy Delft brewer, Peter van Ryven, who owned roughly 21 of his paintings. Newer research from Rijksmuseum curators has shifted some of that attention toward his wife, Maria de Knot, pointing to a will in which Vermeer is the only person outside her own family named to receive a significant sum. That doesn't identify who commissioned this specific canvas. The early ownership of this exact painting still carries question marks in the Morditshouse's own records. What it does is change which household historians are looking at when they try to reconstruct Vermeer's circle of support. Without a name for the model, historians have done what they always do when a name is missing. They've proposed candidates. The records offer two real names and one entirely fictional one. Ironically, the fictional woman is the one most people now believe. The strongest documented candidate is Vermeer's own daughter, Maria. the theory favored by a handful of writers who point to facial similarities with models in his other interior scenes. The chronology weakens that argument rather than destroying it outright. Maria would have been around 11 or 12 years old if the painting's conventional date is correct, and a stylized tronie can't really serve as reliable evidence of anyone's exact age. A second candidate is Magdalena van Rooven, daughter of the family that owned the picture for generations, which would at least explain how it stayed in one household for so long. The third name belongs to no historical record at all, a servant called Greet, invented by a novelist 3 centuries later, who nonetheless became, for millions of readers and moviegoers, the closest thing to a real answer. None of the 3 has a document behind it. Not a letter, not a parish record. The identity isn't missing because nobody looked. It's missing because Vermeer, whether by choice or by the ordinary habits of his genre, never left a trail toward it. So where does the confidence around this painting actually come from? The paint, the documents, or the reputation of the experts who studied it? That question gets tested hardest in the story of its most famous imitation. In the 1920s, a forger named Theo van Wijngaarden produced a canvas called The Smiling Girl, copying the pose, the dark background, and a glowing pearl earring closely enough that Wilhelm van Bode, one of the most respected connoisseurs in Europe, certified it in 1926 as an authentic early Vermeer. The painting entered an important American collection under that name, but the attribution gradually collapsed under later scrutiny. By 1975, it was already catalogued as the work of a follower, and further research eventually connected it more specifically to Van Wijngaarden's own hand. The episode exposed how long an attribution can survive on authority alone, and why the paint itself eventually has to become the evidence, not the signature of the man vouching for it. Set that forgery next to the real canvas, and the contrast sharpens something about the original. The genuine girl doesn't just survive scrutiny, she keeps producing new evidence the closer anyone looks. The microscope produced one final, more intimate discovery. Conservators found fine hairs shed from Vermeer's own brush, embedded permanently in the paint surface, in the delicate flesh layers of her face. His physical residue sealed into hers for close to 400 years. But the painting's dependence on illusion is only half the story. At one point, the illusion itself nearly disappeared entirely. In 1654, more than a decade before this canvas was painted, a gunpowder magazine exploded in the middle of Delft, flattening part of the city and killing the young painter Karel Fabricius, whose handling of light had shaped Vermeer's own approach. Vermeer grew up watching his city rebuild around that absence. 3 centuries later, absence threatened this specific painting too. Not from gunpowder this time, but from a different war. As Nazi authorities began stripping Dutch museums for a planned Führer Museum in Linz, the director of the Mauritshuis had this canvas hidden first in a bunker built into the dunes near Castricum, then, in 1942, moved deep underground into the limestone caves of St. Petersburg near Maastricht, 35 meters below the surface, sitting in the dark beside Rembrandt's Night Watch, until liberation in 1945. For 3 years, the museum's walls held only empty frames where paintings like this one used to hang. A picture built almost entirely out of the illusion of presence spent the war as an actual absence. We now know the mineral history of nearly every pigment on this canvas better than we know almost anything about the woman it depicts. Researchers traced the lead white to mines in the Peak District of northern England, the very country the Dutch Republic was fighting the year this was painted. They traced the red in her lips to cochineal insects harvested off cactus plants in Mexico and South America. Years of research, international specialists, and some of the most advanced imaging available to conservation science have gone into this canvas, and the woman at the center of it has remained unreachable through all of it. The director of the Maurits house said as much after the 2018 investigation wrapped. She did not give up her identity. The chemistry answered almost every question except the one that started this video. At the beginning, I said the painting had been lying to us. It hadn't. It never promised a black void. That was decay, filling in for a painted room. It never called itself a real pearl. That word came from a title invented long after Vermeer was gone. It never claimed to be the portrait of a known woman. That idea came from novels and films built centuries after the paint dried. Vermeer supplied fragments: light caught on an eye, moisture on a lip, 2 strokes of white suspended in black. He then trusted a stranger's mind, 400 years in the future, to manufacture everything else: the jewel, the room, the biography. We did that work ourselves, and then credited the canvas for our own certainty. Maybe the greatest illusion in this painting was never the earring at all. Maybe it's our confidence that we ever saw it clearly in the first place. If 2 brushstrokes and an empty space where a hook should be can hold together 3.5 centuries of certainty, what else have we accepted as fact simply because it was painted or told to us with enough confidence to sound true?